It has been 20 years since Johnson Family Vacation came out, and I've recently rewatched it, so let's review. So, Johnson Family Vacation is about Nate Johnson and his family. His family is split in two, but they come together to go on a road trip to a family reunion. I mean, that's basically the premise. Pretty simple, but there are other things going on, and there is hijinks involved. Now, as for my personal history with this movie, it was one of those movies that I always enjoyed when I was younger, and it was one of my dad's favorite movies. And then as I grew older, I saw the Rotten Tomatoes score, and I'm like, really? But I just passed it off as just one of those movies that critics hated, but audiences liked or at least appreciated, which is very common with black films. And plus, I remember this also coming around the time when the original Kings of Comedy, which consists of Steve Harvey, Bernie Mac, Cedric the Entertainer, and D.L. Hewley, they were on a high and just getting roles after roles, whether they were good or bad. And of course, being this movie starring Cedric the Entertainer, this was kind of a vehicle for him. Despite its really low Rotten Tomato score, which is, I believe, 6%, I still liked this movie and had some fun with it. But with a filmmaking and adult eye, I can see why some people didn't like it. But for me, having watched two of the National Lupin Vacation movies for the first time, I clearly see that this is just National Lupin's Vacation, the black version. And plus, to me, this movie is also a slice of the 2000s for me because as I was watching this movie, I was getting really nostalgic for some of the things in this movie that came out in 2004. And at the time when this movie came out, it perfectly resembles my family. Like Cedric, he was my dad. I was Bow Wow. I was in the same age range as Bow Wow when this movie came out. I have an older sister, and then I got two younger sisters, but in this movie's case, there's only one. But Cedric the Entertainer and Bow Wow, they were the top billed at this time. Of course, I mentioned Cedric the Entertainer, but Bow Wow, he was getting much older as a rap artist, and all the girls loved him. And this came out, I guess, a couple of years after Like Mike came out, which I believe was his first film. But I do like the father-son bond in this movie because it's perfectly depicted with black fathers and black sons. And it definitely reminded me of my own relationship with my dad at the time. But Bow Wow, he had some funny moments, and then he had some corny moments, I should say, particularly the part where they're picking up the vehicle and he's looking at the rims and he's like, "Look at the wheels!" I'm like, ugh, cringe. But of course, Cedric the Entertainer, being a comedian he definitely had more than a bunch of funny moments. Like particularly when they do pull up with that vehicle and his wife, or at that point in the movie, soon to be ex-wife, she sees the car and she says, "It looks like a purse." And then he responds with, "Well, good, you should fit just right in." But I really mean it when I say this movie is basically Vacation for black people, right down to the vehicle and right down to some of the dangerous things they go through in this movie. And even all the stuff they're going through on this road trip, such as picking up people, making wrong turns, and making unnecessary stops, and leaving hotels and just damage. But Vanessa Williams plays his wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife in the movie at that point. But they are separated. She has her daughters while he has his son. And you can tell the love they have for each other, but at the same time, there's still some friction between each other. And this is the point in the movie where I can see why it kind of has this low score, because I do feel like, as fun as this movie is, there are plot points and elements that could have just been developed a little bit more. Like, why are these two getting divorced? Or separated, I should say. Meanwhile, you have his oldest daughter, played by Solange Knowles. She's like the typical teenage girl that's into her phone, and she's into boys, and, she's getting older, and she thinks she's grown. Perfect for Solange. Though it was kind of funny when she makes a reference to her own sister, Beyonce, talking about her belly button. And I'm like, oh, wow. I just thought that was a fourth wall breaking moment. And then daughter number two, his youngest daughter, she's a little girl and she has an imaginary dog that she eventually ditches at the end of the movie. But that imaginary dog was basically her coping with the fact that her parents are separated. And then once she sees that her parents got back together in the end, she's like, "I think I can let the imaginary dog down." I'm like, hey, some character development right there. Another funny moment of mine in this movie is in the beginning when they're on the car trip and Cedric the Entertainer, he is listening to all his old school music, and then Bow Wow, he's just not having it. And so he takes it out and he tries to put in some of his rap CDs, and then Cedric's like, "No one who's been shot." And so Tupac Shakur, shot. Notorious B.I.G.,
shot.
C Murder.
Dad, C Murder wasn't shot?
Yeah, but with a name like that, he should have been.
And then he flips that back on him by saying Sam Cooke,
shot.
Marvin Gaye,
shot.
Al Green.
Wait a minute now, he wasn't shot. That was hot grits.
That was close enough. Shot.
What?
I totally forgot all about that scene, and when I watched it for the first time in years, I busted the fuck out laughing. Cedric the Entertainer is not the only original king of comedy in here. You also get Steve Harvey, who plays his brother, and they have a little long-standing sibling rivalry goes along, and they also have one of my favorite moments, which was the prayer, and it goes on a little for too long, and everybody eventually leaves. Their mom, she's a little disapproving of Nate and his wife, but that does get a little bit of development towards the end, though. Then there's other actors in this movie who I either didn't know back then or didn't know was in this movie, such as D. Ray Davis putting on his best African accent when he's selling them the car. Shannon Elizabeth, where the hell has she been? But anyway, she plays a hitchhiker that they pick up, and she gave a hilarious prayer that is also a bit weird. And she has a little pet alligator that ends up in the family's room, and then she takes it back, and they're all like, yo, let's go now. But Jason Momoa is in this movie, and he basically plays an Indian where they stop at this Indian restaurant, and they come across him to pretty much give him directions. But Solange knows she happens to be there, and she is just mesmerized by him. And of course, she's mesmerized by Jason Momoa. Oh, how times have changed since 2004. And it's also crazy how if you had told me in 2004 that this guy was going to play Aquaman, I would have been like, okay. Cedric the Entertainer, he tries to get his Eddie Murphy on by playing multiple roles. He plays Uncle Earl. He tries to fix their car after it breaks down. The actual family reunion itself, it's actually pretty entertaining because it's relatable. You got family members that you can identify with, particularly the cousin that's always asking for money. In the whole talent contest where they sing a little song together. And it's also a full circle moment for the father and son because his father, he was so disapproving of his son listening to hip hop. But then he sees like, oh, there is some good to be had with hip hop and it can be used for positivity. But like I said, this movie is basically vacation for black people. It does has its funny moments. I feel like it's more so relatable to black folks because it was definitely relatable to me and almost to a T, it was scary. But I'll also acknowledge some of the bad elements in this movie, such as things don't really get that much development. It does just kind of wrap up at the end out of nowhere. I said for Above the Rim, I thought it was a well-prepared, familiar meal. I'd say for this, it's like a mediocre, familiar meal. But you still like it anyway because it satisfied you. Do I think this movie is worth its Rotten Tomato score? Not necessarily, but do I think it's perfect? No, but I still think it's just somewhere in the middle. It's just fun. It did what it set out to do, and you have fun watching it. And 20 years later, I do think it's a nice little slice of the 2000s. I'm going to give Johnson Family Vacation the thumbs up emoji.